Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm your host, Amanda Lamb. 250,000 people gathered in our nation's capital 60 years ago on August 28, 1963, for the March on Washington, headed by Dr. Martin Luther King. The historic event is largely credited as helping pass the 1964 Civil Rights Act. One of the people in that crowd was veteran North Carolina state lawmaker, Representative Mickey Michaux of Durham. He has vivid memories of that day. This week, he turned 93 years old, and he sat down with WRAL anchor and reporter Ken Smith to share his recollections of this monumental event in our country's history and his personal relationship with Dr. Martin Luther King. Here's some excerpts from his powerful interview with Ken.
So I get a flight out of Chicago the next morning, get into Washington, and pick me up and take me to a roundabout to the back of the Lincoln Memorial. So I went out on the platform and here, humongous. I mean, you could, if you've ever been to Washington, you know that the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the Capitol are right in line with each other. And you could see this mob of people. I remember seeing all the way down to the Washington Monument. And that was a long way. You had the reflecting pool in front of the Lincoln Memorial. But, I mean, they tell me the mob extended beyond even the Washington Monument. I asked one of the park rangers, I said, have you all estimated the crowd yet? He said, yeah, we figure it's about 250, 260,000 people out there. And I went back, I said, Martin, I said, you got a crowd of folks out there. I said, what you gonna tell them? But the thrust of the whole thing, everybody made it known to me, was around Martin. However long you live, however long your memory runs, you will never forget the sea of people. Martin had always told me that he had always tried to get me basically involved like he was. In 1964, in my last year in law school, I finally told Maynard, I said, you know, Maynard, I'm going to do what Martin's been trying to get me to do, and that's to get involved in politics. And of course, at that time, Maynard said, come on, we're going to your house right now. I said, for what? He said, we're going to call Martin right now, and you're going to tell him what you're going to do so you can't back out. And the more I think, it was the speech in Washington in that hot August day in 1963 that brought me to that decision in 1964 to really get involved in the political scene. I remember the speech just like it was yesterday. Everybody remembers I have a dream. But the part of the speech that I remember was his opening in that. We have come here today to cash a check return marked insufficient funds. And he took off from that point. We were in a state of mind like a check. You give a person a check, you think it's a good check, but then it comes back marked insufficient funds because you may have the funds in there, but you either stop payment on it or something happened. We came here to get our money, to get our cash, to cash that check in that you have been promising people for all of these years. You've been promising everybody got their checks cashed but us. That experience and my experience knowing Martin and others involved drove me for 40 years.
We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. Here's more from Ken Smith's interview with Mickey Michaux.
I knew about segregation. I knew that when the bus came out of the black neighborhood and stopped at Dillard Street off of Pettigrew Street, the bus driver would stop the bus and make sure all the black folks were sitting in the rear of the bus so that when he crossed the tracks and got up to Main Street, there would be no black folks sitting in the front of the bus. I realized that. I go to a United Department store in downtown Durham and I see two fountains. One says white, one says color. I invited Martin to Durham in 1956 because I was head of a trade week program here. But Martin and I got to be pretty tight after that, and had several talks. I valued it. Over the years, it grew. That's why when I decided to enter politics in 1964, after the speech in August of '63, I knew that Martin had touched something that made me really want to get more involved than I was involved here in Durham. And it was that friendship that we had made me keep wanting to move in the right direction. For instance, in the Selma to Montgomery March, I got a call from Martin on that. He said, "We need you, to be with us." I said, "Have you gotten the order from the judge yet that you could go ahead on and care?" He said, "No, we haven't gotten it, but we're going." I said, "Well, when you get the order from the judge, I'll be there." Everybody was there. Belafonte, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter, Paul, and Mary. All of these folks that you could think of were there that night. Put it all back to the March on Washington. I sided with Martin. Made me proud of the fact that Martin was a friend, that I can always go back in my mind and remember the counsel that we would talk about, the silly stuff we talked about, the serious stuff we talked about. History to me is the most important thing. You can't whitewash history. It's there. And if you don't know your history, you find a tendency that it will repeat itself. To one group of folks today, they have forgotten the history. It's still situated with the civil rights movement today. It is unfinished. There's so many things that in my life I've seen happen. The March on Washington and the Selma to Montgomery March, I think, were one of the 4 or 5 main pieces that helped bring this country together. We've come a long ways, but we still got a long ways to go. In 1964, I ran for North Carolina State House, as I told you before. I lost the race by 120 votes. I ran again in 1966. I ran again in 1968. That was the year that Martin and Bobby Kennedy both were assassinated in 1968. That was the year that I swore I would never get back involved in politics anymore. In 1972, redistricting came about and we got an extra seat in Durham. Folks came to me and said, "Now's your time." And I remember some of the talks that Martin had when Martin said, "Your time will come, our time will come. The moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. How long? Not long." All of these things occurred to me in 1972. And I said, I cannot let my friend, even though he's gone, I still have to maintain what he and I talked about over the years that our friendship existed. That speech, those opening remarks and those closing remarks, we have come here today to cash a check return marked insufficient funds. This country, we know, is not bankrupt. You cannot forget how you got there, and you cannot forget the impact it had on you. 60 years later, I look back and see what's happening today and say we still haven't learned our history, that we have to keep our history moving so that we don't make the same mistakes that we made before.
I appreciate it.
My pleasure, but I'm glad that I can sit here and remember it and to talk about it and to think of the good times and the bad times and what contributions that speech 60 years ago had on the whole program, the whole march, the whole genre of equality, diversity, education. This country will never forget it. No question about it. There's no question about it. I mean, you don't see 250,000 people gathered just for the sake of gathering. They were there for a purpose. I learned my purpose there.
You found your purpose that day.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. For more news from WRAL, sign up for the WRAL Morning Briefing newsletter. You'll be informed and ready to face the day with one concise email. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter. As always, thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download.